real pleasure to very warmly welcome you to this panel today at this Gates event on Are Millennials Happy? I'm Tine Van Bortel. I'm a senior research associate here at the University of Cambridge, and my main research is around mental health, but also around society and health, the interaction between the two. I'm also a mandated council member on mental health with the World Economic Forum and with the WHO. I will be the moderator for this particular panel today, and in terms of the setup of this particular session, which might be slightly different in some of the other sessions you attend, we are actually having a very brief introduction, 5 minutes, to this particular topic. Then I will introduce the panelists to you. We have a very exciting lineup today, and the panelists will then be able to give their talk, and there will be plenty of discussion and Q&A time afterwards. So, millennials, who are they? What are they? It depends a little bit what the cutoff point is that you want to use in terms of the birth year. So there are studies that use the late 70s, for instance, up till the mid-90s as a cutoff point. And in that case, if you use 77 as a cutoff point, I just fall into the millennials, albeit a very old one. But most of the studies actually use 1980 or early 1980s up till 2000, round about that time, as the millennials. So however we look at it, it's people who are currently, roughly, broadly speaking, in their 20s and 30s. That's the generation of millennials that we are talking about. And over time, there have been quite a lot of studies on the happiness and unhappiness of millennials. There has been a flurry of reporting and research on this particular topic, with some saying that the millennial generation is actually happier than their parents and grandparents before them, and others saying that millennials are by far unhappier than previous generations. So those stating that millennials are unhappier than their previous generations, and there are surveys conducted by Deloitte and others, say that it's mainly in relation to the workplace, that millennials have too high an expectation of the workplace and life in general, coupled also with a sense of being extra special. And if you put your mind to anything that you want to do, you can reach anything you want to do. You can be anyone you want to be. So it's that wild ambition, if you like, coupled with a sense of extra specialness that actually is a recipe for unhappiness, according to these studies. And at the same time, this is also the generation of Facebook crafting, image crafting. And here you see a depiction of exactly what I've just talked about. It's that discrepancy, and I'm just going to point it out here. So these are millennials, and this person, this particular person is very unhappy because there are very high expectations around work and life in general. So green grass is not enough. You have to have flowers and, on top of that, a unicorn spouting out a rainbow. So there are huge expectations, and reality is not that, particularly not now quite often. Then we also have the Facebook image crafting generation that we are in, whereby we see these peers of ours whose reality is here, basically, depict their reality to be exactly this on their Facebook pages. And this envy and inadequacy feeling based on false representations, if you like, or inflated representations of one's reality, coupled with one's own reality, creates those frustrations. So there are actually also reports, because I have to point out unhappiness doesn't necessarily mean mental health problems, but there are reports pointing out and mentioning that unhappiness is also quite often coupled to real-life worries and stresses. And those worries and stresses, in turn, can lead to anxieties, to depression, to self-harming, and to a whole array of other mental health problems. And in fact, when you look at WHO and European Commission reports on young people's health, it makes for quite bleak reading. And in fact, if you are interested in workplace well-being and workplace mental health, then I could recommend, this is a bit self-interest here, but I could recommend one of the studies we have been carrying out with the World Economic Forum and also with the research charity transforming mental health on mentally healthy workplaces. So there are, on the other hand, studies that say that millennials are actually happier than previous generations, and especially post 2008 depression or recession and depression. For instance, the arguments here thrown up are that millennials actually have lived through this recession, they have lived through the technological revolution, and they know that life and work is challenging, and therefore they have actually thrown overboard all the expectations and all the workplace expectations, if you like, that their grandparents and their parents held so dear. And actually, this throwing overboard of these particular expectations means that the current generation of millennials is actually happier, according to these studies, than the previous generations. So as you can see, there are contradicting studies out there about the state of happiness or unhappiness that millennials are in. And today we have a very exciting lineup of panelists who will discuss exactly that and topics within that very wide range of millennial happiness and unhappiness and potentially well-being and mental health coupled to that. Our first speaker today is Neha Kinariwala, and she is the founder and chief executive officer of the Humanology Project. She's also an alumna of SUNY Stony Brook and graduated from the University of Cambridge here as a Gates Scholar in 2015. Neha is also actively collaborating with Oxford Epilepsy Research Group and the All India Institute for Medical Sciences. Her research investigates the psychosocial and stigmatizing effects that epilepsy have on marriage through ethnographic and qualitative studies. Welcome, Neha. Our second speaker today will be Alex Davies, who was the president of the Gates Scholars Community in 2012 and has spent a good amount discussing and looking into student welfare at university. So this should be very interesting to hear more about it in this group here. And he will be talking more about the general prevalence and mental health issues at universities. And our third and final speaker today is Lindsay Chura. Do I pronounce that correctly? Yes. She received a doctorate here at Cambridge in psychiatry and is currently the Chief Scientific Officer for the Global Council on Brain Health. She's an AARP and Age UK collaborative and focuses on providing clear and dependable recommendations for maintaining and improving brain health. And she will talk about millennials' overall well-being from her perspective. So without any further ado, I would like to open the floor to our first speaker, Neha.
Thank you. So we live in a global society. Is this on? No. Should I just?
Yeah, just bring it closer.
Okay. Hi. Is that fine? Hello?
I think it's more for like my recording than
Okay.
yes,
That's fine. So we live in a global society where productivity is at the crux of prosperity. As a result, universities and businesses pride themselves on the stereotypical standard of success. Those who are able-bodied and capable of withstanding tremendous pressures and are those who succeed within these systems. I'll focus primarily on the systems in place for universities, as many millennials fall within this category. So evidence suggests that mental health problems of students are more severe now than they have been in the past, and there are a greater number of students who are seeking help. For example, in a national survey for directors on campus psychological counseling centers, 95% of directors reported a significant increase in severe psychological problems among their students. There has been a marked increase in the amount of students in universities with several concurrent issues. So there are primarily two issues that have arisen within the studies. The first is that students and families primarily rely on universities for mental health and supportive services for the students. And the second is that there are many budgetary cutbacks that make growth in mental health staffing quite difficult. So universities, as a result, have not necessarily been efficient in responding to this increased demand. Oftentimes, the broader campus becomes aware of the mental health needs of the students only after a crisis has occurred. As a result, universities push mental health to the sidelines. The tragedy of this scenario is that students who can overcome the stigma within their communities would seek help from and actually seek out help for their mental illness are often met with further institutional stigma, in which students are forced to take leave of absence. In certain instances, there is no guarantee that the student will be readmitted to the school. Yale University's policy is infamous for this. Many students are discouraged from taking leaves of absences in the beginning, and eventually, once they get pushed further, are forced to take a leave. Many students are also feel punished for being forced to withdraw, and they're unfairly cut off from all the resources that the university provides, and forced to spend way more time away than needed, as well as are required to complete unnecessary tasks for readmission. There are, however, more demographic implications to the millennial generation in college campuses. People who would have never come to college a decade or two ago are now able to due to new medications. So with this population, there are comorbidities of anxiety and depression which should be taken into account when looking at the figures of an increased number of people going to mental health facilities. Millennials have also brought a new level of anxiety and perfectionism that contribute to these record numbers of panic attacks on campuses. But this perfectionism brings about a positive dimension to millennial generation. We're not complacent about the situation that we've been put in, and there's something profoundly ambitious about aspiring for a happy and fulfilled life. For this generation to push through pervasive and felt and enacted stigma for mental illness and actually seeking help is a success in and of itself. In striving for treatment, this generation is doing what other generations have failed to do, and we're overcoming challenges in mental health as a mark of resiliency. And I think that universities and businesses need to consider patients with mental health as a mark of diversity rather than a burden. Thanks.
Thank you, Naya. Thank you very much. So any questions you have for interactive discussion later, please do keep them in mind. Mm-hmm. Alex.
Thanks, and thanks, Neha. I think those are really good things to be starting the conversation with. In terms of me starting, I should probably just mention why I'm on the panel, because these guys, everyone, including the moderator, is very experienced in this area. And when this panel was first being put on, I did a lot of research on satisfaction with life and what can be inferred from social networks and online. And then only later did I find out that this is actually a panel about mental health. And so I've got lots of fun facts about emoticons and how you can tell people are feeling based on this, in case you couldn't already tell what a smiley face means. But I think, given the opportunity to talk about more serious things, I think sometimes you have a responsibility to do that. So fortunately, this is a talk that kind of writes itself. After a couple of weeks of telling people I'm going to go talk on a panel about mental health, the majority of people are like, oh yeah, I had depression, I had anxiety during my entire PhD. And sometimes far more serious things. And these stories are pretty, vary from understandable to quite intense. Starting with the guy who wakes up in the middle of the night clutching his throat. Going on to the people who can't get out of bed for 3 hours every morning, and the people for whom walking down to the Gates room. Crossing that intersection between Fitzbillies before you get there, and having the most happy thought, the blissful thought of their week being, if I got hit by a bus, then I wouldn't have to finish my thesis, which is sad and funny. I can kind of see what that means in a lot of ways. So my role is on the council and just as friends to people, and especially after having had this thing on the panel, I hear about this stuff all the time. I also suffered from depression for about 3 years, largely overlapping with my time at Cambridge. And so I guess I have a personal view on how achievement, expectation, responsibility, and in some part ego really plays into susceptibility and being in an at-risk population for mental health issues. So there's some good stats I read when I was researching so I could have some reasonable things to say on the matter. And it turns out there's been a couple of big studies in the US in the last couple of years one across all American universities, and then one at Berkeley in particular for graduate students. And it's pretty consistent across the board that across these universities, 36 to 45% of people have experienced depression of some magnitude, and this is between undergrads and graduate students. And then Berkeley was just confined to graduate students and mainly PhD students. And the rate of depression there among PhD students is 50%. If you're unfortunate enough to be studying the humanities and arts, which I know a number of people around here are, it's 64%. And then 10% of the general population having at least considered suicide. And so coming back to the question of like, are millennials happy? If we take this definition of like, we are millennials, that pretty much everyone here kind of falls in that bracket. I'm not going to talk about whether or not we are more or less happy than previous generations, because there's a lot can be said about like actually seeking treatment. But when 50% of people suffer from depression and 10% want to kill themselves, I will say probably not, or at least we could be happier. So I guess going on from that, it's really important to acknowledge like what an at-risk population means, and that in fact we are in a very at-risk population for this kind of thing. And as just a way to frame maybe some thoughts or questions later on, I want to put forward an example of something that I think highlights maybe the way that we think and talk about this and treat this in universities, especially at Cambridge. And that's the first time that I saw a psychologist. I genuinely had no need for it. So I played sport very seriously from a relatively young age, from 14 through 22 or 23. And Australia has good infrastructure for this kind of thing. And it's just accepted that if you're that young and you start to train the amount that we did, which is 20, 25 hours outside of school, that this is a strenuous situation. You're potentially going to be performing at an elite level, and you're an at-risk population. And if you have an at-risk population, it's not just that the facilities are made available, it's that everybody goes. It's expected that you do, in exactly the same way as it is expected that you take physio before you're injured. You obviously go to physio when you are injured, but preventative measures are seen as the norm, and this is actually really important. I don't know if anyone has had experience with the counselling service in Cambridge, but the waiting list is 2 months, except for extreme cases. And this is something else in sport that is really cultured in a positive way. There's a lot of negative things in sport in general, but from an early on, especially if you're playing in a team sport, you learn to identify the guy who's playing through on an injury, who has a strained ankle or a strained knee, knowing that if he plays through the game, he's going to break his ankle or he's going to break his knee, and that he will be out for the rest of the season, and that's bad for the team. And in a lot of the different teams I play for, you learn to socialize to stop people pushing themselves through for the sake of the team and for the sake of themselves, for things are going to be better in the long run. And that's not something that we have across the board here. And I should really highlight, especially during my time on the Scholars Council, there's a bunch of people who care very deeply about these mental health issues, and especially within the scholars community, have put in heaps of effort on a personal level. But I'm referring more to the institutional level here. And I guess just to finish off the metaphor, the idea of what kind of happens here, I think is pretty on balance. We are at a very high level here. It's not ridiculous to say we are at an elite level of academia here, in the same way that you'd be at an elite level of sport at a national level in any of our home countries, for whatever sport that happens to be. I'm from Australia, so rugby is always seen as kind of the pinnacle of that sport in my mind. And I imagine if there was, if the Australian Wallabies and the coach decided to take in the top 120 student rugby players from around the country, put them in an environment where physio was not encouraged, it was made theoretically available with 2 months booking in advance, but you should probably reserve it for the people who are actually injured. Gave them no particular coaching over and above sending them in there to do their own individual training and then bringing them out for games. And then you came to the end of the year and you're like, fuck, 50% of my team are injured and 10% have career-ending injuries. I would be like, yes, that makes sense. You really organized this thing very, very badly and you should have seen this coming. And I hope it would be seen as completely irresponsible, and I think we should really think about that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Lindsay?
Well, thank you. It's very interesting to hear your remarks, so I'll try and build upon them as well as add some other aspects as well. So I should mention that I'm coming to this panel from various perspectives, really. During my time here at Cambridge, I was based at the Autism Research Center in the Department of Psychiatry, and I think that an important underlying element in our conversation today is really to recognize that people with conditions such as autism oftentimes have comorbid conditions such as anxiety, depression, bipolar. It's very, very prevalent, and so I know that for the participants that I saw through my study, this was a real concern not only for people during the adolescent period, but making that transition to university and then eventually to the workplace. So I'm very interested in sort of injecting that into the conversation as well. My current work is actually more in the policy realm, so I'm in the health policy area, and I prepared some slides actually based on a survey that was conducted that will give some broad perspective of well-being and some stats that we can draw upon. Let me just pull it up here. Is it not going? Oh, it's not going. Yeah, it's not opening it. Oh. Okay, great. Thanks. We've already had a great background, so I'll just skip over that slide. It's not updating.
That's true.
Oh, or staying on the screen is not being reflected up there.
Any tech wizards in the room? I'm unfortunately not one of them.
Yes, Alice.
Still can't operate projectors.
We'll have to send an SOS to the other panel.
No, it's okay. I'm really happy to just walk through these and have you imagine what the charts may look like. So I'll be as creative as possible. So let me just... Yeah, I tried, but it's not responding when clicking. I think the problem...
Maybe
Or retry.
You can access the internet.
It's
Do you
okay.
wanna
I don't
just
want to.
go?
I don't want to
Yeah.
break the flow of our conversation, so I'll just walk you through them as you imagine what could be on these slides. So as I was saying, I work now in the policy realm, and I'm based at an organization called AARP, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization in the U.S. with nearly 38 million members. So with a presence as large as that, operating on a scale as large as that, there's a big, there's a lot of scope for making a difference both in the U.S. and abroad. And this organization very recently decided to get into the realm of brain health, and in partnership with Age UK, launched in late October the Global Council on Brain Health, and that's when I joined this effort. And it's, as you said in the intro, an opportunity to really cut through the clutter of a lot of the scientific evidence coming out. On any given day, you hear studies that are often conflicting, and people are left wondering, well, what does this really mean? And so the overall goal is to try and have these recommendations that the leading experts in the field come up with based on consensus in a review of the literature, is to have it resonate with people in all corners of the world. So that's the ambition, and as it's a new initiative, we're doing all sorts of background work, and that includes fielding different surveys. So one survey that is used to measure well-being is called the Warwick scale, and it's particularly appropriate for this setting because to date the only work that's been done on that scale has primarily been in the UK, and so this survey that was fielded in March marks the first time that that a US participant base has responded. So it's based on 14 different questions, which I did have listed out, but just to give you a sense of the scale of the survey that measured well-being, we had 1,600 adults aged 18 and over in the U.S. responding, and we were able to factor in things like age, gender, race, ethnicity, employment status, and income. So what I did was, in preparation for this panel, is I stratified according to age. So I looked at the millennials, I looked at people, baby boomers, older boomers is what they're called, and pre-boomers, so before that era. So we cover the full lifespan. And so what we did find is that in this instance, from this sample size, it actually was the case that the results were opposite what you were saying. So now I was thinking in the broader context, perhaps doing this again and having even more participants would be really interesting. So we found that as people got older, they actually got happier. And we have different stressors according to generation that may help to shed light on that finding. So, for example, issues such as separation, divorce, job loss, family conflict, personal injury and illness, family friend, illness and injury, and other sort of miscellaneous stressors that one may encounter throughout the lifespan. So it's optimistic, actually, for us in this room that as you grow older, well-being scores go up, at least in this sample that we found. So they, for example, were asked how you feel about the ability to make up one's own mind. Individuals with anxiety, for example, would find that to be very stressful. Thinking clearly, feeling loved, feeling useful, dealing with problems well, feeling good about myself, feeling confident, feeling cheerful, feeling close to others, interested in new things, feeling optimistic, feeling interested in other people, feeling relaxed, and finally having energy to spare. And so the last point, having energy to spare, is the only question of the 14 that I just read off that only about 1/3 of people said they had energy to spare all the time or often, whereas all the other components of that scale, people, more than 50% of the population reported feeling that way. So it's just an interesting measure. I'm sorry that we don't have the slides working so that you could see the graphs, but I'm happy to follow up with anyone who may have further questions. But I think that in the context of this panel can just help to serve as a springboard for what's happening in more of a bird's eye view. And also because employment status was mentioned earlier and in the description, I just wanted to say that I did look up some stats, and I found that millennials are reported to be, according to a 2014 Consumer Health Mindset survey in the U.S. of 2,700 adults, they were found to actually seek the support of their employers more in terms of helping to promote their own well-being. And that's in contrast to other generation. So the stats I have here, for example, 52% of millennials said living or working in a healthy environment is influential to their personal health, compared to only 42% of respondents from Generation X or 35% from the baby boomers. So millennials, and some more than other generations, are the most likely to want their employers to play an active role in supporting their overall health and well-being. And they are more open to having their direct manager play an active role in helping them to stay healthy compared to previous generations. So I think that has real implications for the workforce as well. Hopefully we can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay.